Talk Senate inquiry yesterday, the Australia Post, the union that is attached to Australia Post or represents its workers, called for the board to resign en masse. Is that a good idea?
Well, you know, that's not for me to say. I thought yesterday's evidence was incredibly telling. There were stories of mail being piled up, parcels and letters in post offices right around the country, including in regional post offices, despite rural and regional services not supposed to be being affected by the temporary order. So that's something we're going to look into further next week when we have another hearing. We also got the board, though, and I'm very thankful that I was able to run through each and every board member online and get their commitment not to privatise any aspect of Australia Post and to really focus on ensuring that rural and regional Australians, many for whom the post office is not just where they post their letters or receive their parcels from online shopping, but is also now their local bank, thanks to the work of former CEO Ms Holgate. So to get that commitment out of the board yesterday is something that I'm looking forward to holding their feet to the fire on over coming years, because too easily sometimes in these government enterprises we take the eye off the ball. They go off and do their own thing, as we've seen through some of the BCG report findings, and really look at privatising, cutting services to community, which, unless you had a Senate inquiry like we're having, wouldn't be uncovered.
So who's cooked up this privatisation plan? Because I feel like Christine Holgate has really halted it, but she seemed to suggest that it was done by, was proactively endorsed or at least put forward as a plan by some board members, and perhaps even had support from within your government. Is there any support from within your government for this, do you know of?
Well, I can speak on behalf of the National Party, and we'll be opposing any privatisation of Australia Post. The 2,500 community post office. Well, I don't hear those conversations. That's one of the issues we're probing in the Senate inquiry. Remembering this BCG report was commissioned by the shareholding ministers, the finance minister and the communications minister. It was to look into opportunities of e-commerce, the regulatory environment, how we could actually make sure that Australia Post was fit for purpose going forward. Now, that was pre-COVID, and I have no doubt that one of the options considered in that report, despite it yet being released publicly, will be to divest of certain aspects of the business. To have that categorically denied by board members, irrespective of what they might have said at the time, I find very, very heartening. Given yesterday's evidence. Yeah,
I'm sure you'll be holding them to it and keeping a little time code for if that does come up in the future. But Bridget McKenzie, before I let you go, Australia's athletes are going to be vaccinated in that 1B cohort. How do you feel about them being essentially categorised as, you know, the most vulnerable or alongside the most vulnerable?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, Laura. I mean, in times of difficulties such as the world's gone through, holding an event like the Olympic Games that we can all look to, be inspired by our fabulous athletes from around the world, but particularly ours, obviously, and some sort of return to normalcy, I think the running of the Olympics would provide. But obviously, I do appreciate that sense that our elite athletes are able to jump the queue, shall we say, on vaccinations would be providing some concern out in community. And that's why it's very, very important to be clear that it's the Australian Olympic Committee that's going to take responsibility for this. So no, the vaccine rollout that's being conducted out there in community, none of those resources will be being diverted to vaccinating our athletes, and nor should I add, I wouldn't like to see our quarantine effort diverted for our athletes either, and I understand that is one of the conversations. I mean, we've also got to think of the Japanese in this. A recent survey saw that over 70% of the Japanese population wants the Olympics cancelled or postponed because they're concerned about athletes coming from right across the world, bringing whatever strain possible. And I think we're kidding ourselves if we think there won't be COVID at the Olympics, no matter how careful everybody is. And Japan's, had just under 10,000 deaths from COVID. So it's a very real concern for them as a sovereign nation as well. So let's see how it plays out. There's still time for them to get it under control. There's still time for the call to postpone if required. But obviously, not seeing any of our community resources for our domestic vaccination program and quarantine system siphoned off for our fabulous athletes, I think it'd be the best outcome.
Yeah, indeed. Bridget McKenzie, always good to talk to you. Thanks so much.